I never thought a quiet Saturday afternoon block party would end with my wife standing in front of everyone, her dress ripped wide open by the very woman who called herself the guardian of our neighborhood's standards. That woman was Karen HOA president, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, and a bully wrapped in pearls. She lunged at my wife like a wildcat, fabric tearing under her clawed hands. Gasps filled the air, but then silence. Because underneath that torn dress was something Karen didn't expect: a bold Marine Corps tattoo inked across my wife's shoulder blade. The second Karen saw it, her whole body froze. Her smug grin collapsed, her eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. That tattoo carried a history Karen couldn't outrun, a reminder of something she desperately wanted buried. In that moment, I realized she had finally picked the wrong family to mess with. And this is how it all unfolded. Before I dive deeper into that wild afternoon, I should tell you who we are and why Karen thought she had the right to treat us like her personal chew toy. My name's Daniel. I'm 54 years old, a former Marine who spent the better part of my 20s learning discipline, patience, and how to keep calm when everything around you turns to fire and chaos. These days, I'm a project manager for a construction company. Nothing fancy, but steady work, and it keeps my hands busy. After years of moving around, my wife and I decided to put down roots in what we thought was a peaceful suburban neighborhood: white fences, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes up and down the cul-de-sac. It looked like the kind of place where you could finally exhale. My wife, Linda, is the kind of woman who can make a room soften just by walking in. She's 49, still radiant as ever, and she has this grace about her that makes people either admire her or envy her. Karen, of course, fell squarely into that second category. Linda's got a gentle soul, but don't mistake that for weakness. I've seen her hold our family together through deployments, financial struggles, and the grind of civilian life. And yes, she carries that Marine Corps tattoo, a small but powerful reminder of her father, who served before me, and who passed away too soon. That tattoo wasn't just ink, it was legacy. When we first moved into the neighborhood, it felt like the kind of dream every working family has. Barbecues in the summer, Christmas lights in the winter, neighbors waving when you drive past. But then there was Karen. Karen wasn't just another neighbor, she was the HOA president. And if you've ever lived under an HOA, you already know what kind of trouble that means when someone like her has power. Karen was in her early 60s, always dressed like she was headed to some country club luncheon. Pearls, pastel sweaters, lipstick that could stop traffic, and a voice that carried down the street like a megaphone. She introduced herself on our first day, and I'll admit, I mistook her for being welcoming. She handed us a welcome packet that was thicker than most military manuals I'd seen, full of rules about mailbox paint colors, lawn heights, acceptable garden gnome sizes, you name it. It's what keeps our community beautiful, she said with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. I should have recognized it then. That smile wasn't kindness. It was a warning. At first, I didn't take her too seriously. After all, we dealt with worse overseas. How bad could one woman with a clipboard really be? But the thing about people like Karen is that they thrive on control. She watched every trash can placement, every holiday decoration, every blade of grass like it was a matter of national security. Linda tried to stay on her good side. She's polite to a fault, always believes the best in people. She'd wave at Karen, compliment her roses, even listen patiently when Karen launched into long-winded speeches about community standards. But I noticed it didn't matter what Linda did, Karen always found something to nitpick. Maybe it was the color of our shutters. Maybe it was the wreath on our door being too large. Once, she even wrote us up for leaving a garden hose visible in the side yard. I laughed it off. Linda didn't. She felt humiliated. And that, right there, is Karen's power. She didn't just enforce rules, she used them to chip away at people, bit by bit. Still, life went on. I'd go to work. Linda tended her flowers, and we tried to make friends with the neighbors. A lot of them were good people, but even they had this wary look whenever Karen's name came up. She had them all walking on eggshells, afraid of fines or letters or public shaming at the monthly HOA meetings. It was like living under a dictator with perfectly trimmed hedges. What Karen never understood about me, though, is that Marines don't take kindly to bullies. We've seen them before. We'll see them again. And eventually, they all crumble the same way. But back then, I hadn't yet decided to fight her head on. I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt. Linda was the one feeling the sting, most often her, and anyone else who didn't bow to Karen's reign. I'll admit, I felt protective. Every time Karen threw a barb at Linda, I had to bite my tongue. I wanted to shut it down then and there, but Linda would squeeze my hand and whisper, "Not worth it. Let's not make it worse." That's who she is, peaceful, forgiving. But even the most patient souls have limits. Looking back, maybe Karen saw Linda's kindness as weakness. Maybe that's why she targeted her more than anyone else. And maybe she thought my silence meant she'd already won. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Because while I can keep my mouth shut when the moment demands, I never stop watching, listening, and waiting. That's a habit drilled into me from years of service. Know your enemy, understand their patterns, and when the time comes, strike with precision. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before everything erupted, before that tattoo made Karen freeze like a deer in headlights, our lives followed this steady rhythm of passive-aggressive notes, quiet frustrations, and small battles no one else seemed willing to fight. It built slowly, like a pressure cooker, and when the lid finally blew off, it wasn't just about a torn dress. It was about years of pent-up resentment, unspoken threats, and one woman's obsession with power. So let me take you back to where it truly began, the very first spark that turned our picture-perfect cul-de-sac into a war zone. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The beginning of every storm always looks harmless at first. Sometimes it's just a gray cloud you barely notice in the corner of your eye. That's how our trouble with Karen really started, not with a thunderclap, but with something so petty it almost seemed laughable. It was a Tuesday evening, late spring. I had just finished mowing the lawn. The grass was neat, cut shorter than I usually liked, but close enough to what the HOA's recommended height claimed was acceptable. I was sweaty, tired, and proud of the fresh stripes across the yard. That's when I saw her Karen, standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, lips pursed like she was sucking on a lemon. "Daniel," she called out, not bothering with hello. "Your grass is an inch too high." I thought she was joking. "An inch? Really?" I actually laughed. "Karen, unless you brought a ruler, I'm not sure how you could possibly know that." She didn't laugh back. Instead, she pointed at my lawn like it was a crime scene. "The HOA guidelines are clear. Grass height should not exceed 2 inches. Yours looks closer to 3. It's unsightly, and it lowers the community's value." I wanted to tell her she sounded ridiculous, but Linda, ever the peacemaker, stepped out onto the porch before I could. "We'll make sure it's trimmed down further next time," she said sweetly, as if Karen were some fragile queen whose feelings needed protecting. Karen gave a stiff nod, but not before scanning Linda's sundress from top to bottom, her eyes lingering with a judgment that made my stomach tighten. That was the first time I saw it, that glint of envy, sharp and ugly, hidden behind her fake smile. At dinner that night, Linda brushed it off. "It's fine. If she wants shorter grass, we'll cut it shorter." But I could see the faint frustration in her eyes. She wasn't angry at the grass. She was angry at being patronized in her own home. And that, I think, was the seed of everything that followed. A week later, the second strike landed. Linda had placed a small planter box on the porch, a cheerful burst of daisies and lavender, something to brighten the entryway. I came home from work to find Karen waiting in the driveway, clipboard in hand like she was writing parking tickets. "This planter," she said, tapping it with her pen, "it violates HOA standards. Only one decorative item allowed on porches. You already have a welcome mat. 2 items is clutter." I raised an eyebrow. "Clutter, Karen. It's a 12-inch box of flowers, not a pile of junk." She ignored me and turned to Linda, who was standing just behind the screen door. "I'm sorry, dear, but rules are rules. You'll need to remove it immediately." Linda looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded quietly and brought the planter inside. Karen smirked as she walked away. That was the moment I realized she didn't just want compliance. She wanted submission. The third strike came during a neighborhood gathering. It was supposed to be casual burgers on the grill, kids running around, folks sipping beers and chatting. Linda wore a simple summer dress, yellow with white polka dots. She looked radiant, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Neighbors complimented her, smiling as she helped serve lemonade. Karen, though, sat perched in her lawn chair, staring. I could feel her gaze even from across the yard. At one point, she stood up, clinking her glass to get attention. "We need to talk about the upcoming HOA meeting," she announced. "There have been several violations lately that threaten the integrity of our neighborhood." Everyone quieted down. Karen's eyes landed squarely on Linda. "Some people think this is a place for personal expression, but this is a community. We all need to blend in, not stand out." A hush fell over the group. I clenched my jaw. Linda flushed red, looking at the ground, her hands tightening on the serving tray. Karen hadn't named her directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone understood who the target was. I stepped forward, ready to shut it down, but Linda gave me that look, the one that said, "Don't make a scene." She was mortified, but still she wanted peace. I held my tongue, but inside, I was boiling. That night, as we sat on the couch, I told her, "You know she's doing this on purpose, right? She's not enforcing rules, she's picking on you." Linda sighed, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I know, but what do? We can't fight her over every little thing. It'll just make it worse." Maybe she was right, but in my gut, I knew this wasn't going to stop. People like Karen don't stop until someone makes them. The final spark came a few weeks later, and this one nearly pushed me over the edge. It was the day Linda received her first official violation letter, a bright yellow envelope stamped with the HOA logo, accusing her of leaving unsightly laundry visible on our backyard line. The unsightly laundry in question, 2 clean white towels she had hung to dry. Linda held that letter in her hands like it was a scarlet letter, her face pale with embarrassment. "She sent this to the whole board," she whispered. Everyone saw it. That's when I saw the first crack in my wife's calm. Her eyes watered, not from fear, but from humiliation. And that, more than anything, lit the fire in me. Because here's the thing, Marines are trained to stay patient, to wait for the right moment. But once you cross a line, once you go after my family, you've officially stepped into enemy territory. And Karen had just declared war. If Karen's first complaints felt like mosquito bites, what came next was a swarm. It wasn't just 1 or 2 nitpicks anymore, it was a campaign, a crusade. She turned our peaceful cul-de-sac into her personal battlefield, and Linda and I were her chosen targets. At first, it was the letters, not the casual reminders we'd seen before, but official-looking envelopes with HOA stamps that landed in our mailbox like summons from a court. One read, "Trash cans must be stored within 20 minutes of pickup. Yours remained visible for 37 minutes. Another, children's chalk drawings on sidewalks are considered vandalism. Kindly remove immediately." And the one that nearly made my blood boil. "The American flag displayed at your residence is worn and detracts from neighborhood appearance. Please replace immediately. Now." Let me tell you, I've saluted that flag in the desert while mortars were falling 100 yards away. I've seen Marines drape it over coffins of men better than me. To hear Karen dismiss it as worn because a little sunlight had softened the colors, it wasn't just insulting, it was sacrilegious. I wanted to march over to her house right then and there, but Linda, always calm, always gentle, put her hand on my arm. "Not yet," she whispered. "She wants a fight. Don't give her one." And so we endured. But Karen wasn't satisfied with written jabs. She wanted spectacle. She wanted to humiliate us publicly. It happened at the neighborhood block BBQ. Everyone brought out lawn chairs and coolers. Kids played tag in the street, and the smell of burgers hung in the air. Linda wore a light summer dress, blue, simple, elegant. She looked beautiful, and neighbors told her so. That's when Karen struck. She stood up from her chair, cleared her throat loudly, and clinked her glass for attention. "I'd like to remind everyone," she said, "that we live in a family community, which means we should dress appropriately for neighborhood events." Her eyes locked on Linda. The chatter died instantly. You could feel the air tighten. Linda froze, her cheeks flushing red. She clutched the tray of lemonade like it was a lifeline. I nearly crushed the soda can in my hand. Every muscle in me wanted to stand up and end it right there. But Linda, even in her embarrassment, gave me that quiet look, the one that begged me not to escalate. So I stayed seated, jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Linda slipped inside the house after that, humiliated. The laughter and chatter resumed outside, but I heard whispers. Karen had achieved what she wanted. She'd made my wife the object of gossip. That night, I found Linda sitting on the edge of our bed, shoulders slumped. She made me feel dirty. Daniel, like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. That was the moment the line was crossed for me. But Karen wasn't finished. Oh no. She escalated further. A week later, we received an official notice of violation with a $200 fine attached. Listed infractions included improper lawn height, visible porch clutter, the planter box with flowers, inappropriate attire worn by spouse at community event. Yes, you read that right. Karen had actually written up my wife's dress as a violation. Linda held the letter in her hands like it was a scarlet letter, her face pale. She sent this to the entire board. She whispered. Everyone saw it. That's when I knew Karen had shifted from petty to personal. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was waging war against us. And then came her boldest move yet. One evening, I pulled into the driveway after work to find a group of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. In the center stood Karen, holding up one of her precious clipboards. She was waving it around like a preacher with a Bible, declaring how certain residents were undermining community values. Her eyes flicked toward our house, her smile tight and victorious. I didn't rise to it. Not yet. Marines know patience is as deadly a weapon as any rifle, so I simply walked past the group, nodded politely, and went inside. Linda looked at me, fear and anger mixed in her eyes. "We can't keep living like this," she said. "She won't stop." I kissed her forehead and said, "I know. And that's why it's time we stop playing defense. Because the truth is, Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought no one would dare stand up to her. She believed her rules and her power over the HOA board gave her immunity. But every tyrant has a weakness. And from that night forward, I was done waiting for Karen to strike. I was going to find the crack in her armor. And when I did, I'd make sure she never forgot the day she turned on the wrong Marine's family. Karen thought she was invincible. After the public shaming at the BBQ, after the bogus violation letters, after parading our names in front of neighbors like we were criminals, she walked around the neighborhood like a queen who had conquered new land. Her pearls bounced, her pastel cardigans glowed, and that smug little grin clung to her face like it was glued there. But I've seen that kind of confidence before, usually on people who were one wrong step away from disaster. In the Marines, you learn that the loudest chest thumpers are often hiding something. And if you wait, if you watch, eventually they slip. So that's what I did. I watched. The first crack came during an HOA meeting. Karen was reading through the monthly financials like she was presenting the State of the Union. Most folks weren't paying attention, eyes glazed, heads nodding, probably thinking about dinner. But numbers have always spoken to me. I manage construction budgets for a living. I know when digits don't add up. And let me tell you, they didn't. Karen read aloud that we'd spent nearly $6,000 on landscaping enhancements for the neighborhood park. Now, I'd walked that park 100 times. I hadn't seen $6,000 worth of improvements. A few new shrubs, sure. A fresh coat of paint on the swing set. But $6,000, not a chance. After the meeting, I casually asked one of the board members, a timid guy named George, what exactly those enhancements were. He stuttered, glanced around, and finally muttered, "Karen handled it personally." Then he shuffled away like he'd revealed state secrets. That was my first breadcrumb. The second came a week later. I was jogging early one morning when I saw Karen unloading her car. The trunk was stuffed with bags from a high-end home decor store lanterns, throw pillows, even a fancy bird bath. She struggled to haul them inside, grumbling under her breath. Later that day, I passed by the park. Not a single new lantern, not one pillow. The bird bath, nowhere in sight. I started connecting dots. Karen wasn't spending HOA funds on the community, she was using them for herself. Now, a suspicion isn't proof. And Marines know you don't move on suspicion, you gather intel until your case is bulletproof. So I got to work. I attended every HOA meeting, taking notes like a court stenographer. I pulled public records of HOA expenditures. I even called the landscaping company listed on the invoices. A friendly clerk, not knowing who I was, let slip that the biggest project they'd billed was only $1,500. The invoices I'd seen under Karen's name double that. And then came the jackpot. One evening, I caught Karen in what she thought was a private conversation. She was on her porch, speaking sharply into her phone. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. No, don't put my name on it. Bill it to the HOA account. I'll sign off as president. Bingo. Fraud. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Missing funds, altered invoices, mysterious maintenance fees with no paper trail, and every single one had Karen's fingerprints all over them. But financial corruption wasn't the only skeleton in her closet. One night, over a glass of bourbon, I was talking with an older neighbor named Frank. Vietnam vet, gruff voice. Didn't say much unless he meant it. He leaned in and told me, "You know, this isn't Karen's first HOA circus. She pulled the same nonsense back in her old neighborhood across town. Got booted from the board after the books didn't line up. Moved here, reinvented herself." I raised my eyebrows. "How do you know?" Frank chuckled bitterly. "My sister lived in that neighborhood. Saw it all firsthand. Karen packed up and fled before the lawyers closed in. She's slick, but not invincible." That was it. Her weakness wasn't just numbers. It was history, a history she wanted buried. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became this was Karen's pattern. Control through fear, skim money under the radar, move on before anyone could pin her down. She thrived on silence. She needed people too scared or too tired to fight back. But what she didn't account for was me. I'd spent my life in situations where silence got people killed, where ignoring warning signs led to disaster. I wasn't about to let my wife cry herself to sleep while Karen fattened her pockets with our HOA dues. So I started building my case. Every violation letter I filed away. Every budget report I scanned and compared. Every neighbor who whispered about strange spending, I gently encouraged to speak up, piece by piece. I was constructing a puzzle that would, when complete, spell the end of Karen's reign. Linda, at first, was hesitant. "Daniel, are you sure you want to go down this road? It's stressful enough already. What if she finds out I took her hand and said she already declared war?" "Sweetheart, we're just returning fire. And this time, we'll do it the smart way. No shouting matches, no drama, just truth." That night, I laid out the evidence on our dining table notes. Invoices, copies of emails I'd quietly collected. It looked like a military op plan, complete with objectives and contingencies. Linda looked at it, then looked at me with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "You're really going to take her down, aren't you?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Not just for us, for everyone she's been bullying. People like Karen only win when good folks stay quiet. And I'm done being quiet." What Karen didn't know was that I now had her cornered. She was a fraud, a liar, a repeat offender. And when the time was right, I was going to expose her in front of the very people she lorded over. The queen of the cul-de-sac had finally shown her weakness. And soon, she was going to lose her crown. When you back a cornered animal into a wall, it does one of two things: roll over and surrender, or bare its teeth. Karen was never the type to roll over. I thought I was being subtle, collecting documents, asking questions quietly, comparing numbers after meetings. But either she caught wind of it, or her sixth sense for control told her something was wrong. Because just as I started piecing together her fraud, Karen shifted gears. She stopped hiding behind letters and whispers. She went on the attack. The first strike landed in our mailbox. Another violation letter, only this one wasn't the usual $200 fine. This one threatened foreclosure. I'll never forget the way Linda's hands trembled as she held it. The letter claimed we had repeated egregious violations of HOA code, and unless we paid nearly $3,000 in accumulated fines within 30 days, the HOA would pursue legal recourse, up to and including lien or foreclosure. Linda's voice cracked. "Daniel, she's trying to take our house." I took the letter, read it twice, then set it on the table with deliberate calm. "She can't," I said. "She wants us to believe she can, but she doesn't have the grounds." Still, the letter rattled Linda to the core. That was Karen's weapon fear. She didn't need to be right. She just needed you to believe she was untouchable. But she wasn't finished. The second strike came in the form of rumors. At the next HOA social, supposedly a meet and greet for new families, I noticed people whispering as Linda walked by. One woman actually turned her back, pretending not to see her. When I asked Frank, my old vet neighbor, what was going on, he sighed. "Karen's been talking," he said, "telling folks your wife has a temper, that she caused a scene at the BBQ, even said you were threatening people with your military connections." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Karen wasn't just playing games with fines anymore. She was trying to poison our reputation, to isolate us. That way, when she finally tried to crush us, no one would step in to help. But she underestimated something. The same discipline she mocked me for was the reason I didn't explode. Marines don't take the bait. We wait. Then came her boldest strike yet. Karen called a special session of the HOA board. Every homeowner was invited. Linda and I sat in folding chairs while Karen, standing at the front like a politician on a podium, clicked her tongue and wagged her finger. "There are certain homeowners," she announced, "who believe they are above our community standards, who think their military backgrounds or their sob stories excuse them from following the rules." Every eye turned to us. Karen slammed her clipboard down on the table. "I move to suspend their voting rights in HOA matters until they've demonstrated compliance." Gasps rippled through the room. It wasn't just about fines anymore. She was trying to strip us of our voice entirely. I stood slowly, keeping my tone calm. "Karen, with all due respect, that motion is illegal. You can't strip voting rights without due process. HOA bylaws, Section 4, subsection B." Her face tightened. She hadn't expected me to know the bylaws better than she did, but instead of backing down, she smirked. "Then perhaps we'll let the courts decide." It was a direct challenge. She wanted me to flinch, to lash out, to look like the unhinged veteran she was painting me as. But I didn't. I sat back down, folded my arms, and let her stew in the silence. Later that night, Linda whispered, "She's not stopping. She'll keep pushing until she destroys us." I kissed her temple. "Good. Let her push. She doesn't know she's walking into a trap of her own making." Because the truth was, by striking so hard, so fast, Karen was overextending herself. She was leaving fingerprints all over every shady move she made. The foreclosure letter I'd already confirmed with a lawyer, it was baseless. The rumors neighbors were quietly beginning to doubt her as they realized the stories didn't line up. And the special session, that was the nail in her coffin. I recorded the entire thing, every illegal word she spat out. Karen thought she was tightening the noose. In reality, she was handing me the rope. The next day, I spread out my evidence across the dining table: letters, invoices, audio recordings, even testimony from Frank about her past HOA scandal. It looked like an arsenal. Linda stared at it all and whispered, "Daniel, this could end her." I nodded. "It will, but not yet. Timing is everything. We'll let her think she's won. Then we hit her where it hurts most in front of everyone. Because that's the secret bullies never see coming. The bigger they build themselves up, the harder they fall when you pull the rug." And Karen was about to fall hard. Karen thought she had me cornered. Foreclosure letters, rumor campaigns, stripping voting rights. Her claws were out. Most people would have folded under that kind of pressure. That was her strategy: keep people afraid, isolated, and too tired to resist. But here's the thing. She never understood Marines don't fold. We regroup, we adapt, and then we strike back. After that special HOA session, I went home and laid everything out on the dining room table again. The piles of papers, the audio recordings, the notes from meetings, it looked like a war map. And that's exactly how I treated it. This wasn't just an argument about flower pots or lawn height anymore. It was a full-blown operation, and Karen was the objective. First, I needed allies. A Marine without a unit is just a man yelling at the wind. So I started talking to neighbors quietly, carefully, never pushing. I'd ask simple questions. Did you ever notice the HOA fees going up, or ever wonder why the park still looks run down despite all those landscaping charges? At first, people were hesitant. Karen had scared them into silence. But the more I showed them the numbers, the invoices, the inconsistencies, the more heads began to nod. George, the timid board member, became my first real ally. He was tired of being Karen's puppet, and once he saw I wasn't afraid, he started passing me inside information. She keeps changing budget items after meetings, he whispered one night in his driveway. Adds things no one voted on. Next was Frank, the Vietnam vet. He had credibility in the neighborhood, and when he confirmed Karen's history in another HOA, people started listening. She did it before. She'll do it again. He told them flat out, only this time, she messed with the wrong Marine. By the end of the month, I had a small coalition of neighbors ready to back me up. Not a mob, but a steady line of support. That mattered more. In war, you don't need everyone, you just need the right few standing shoulder to shoulder when the moment comes. Then came the legal prep. I consulted a lawyer recommended by Frank's sister. She specialized in HOA disputes, yes. Apparently, that's an entire career. I dropped the stack of documents on her desk, and her eyes widened as she flipped through them. You realize, she said slowly, this is fraud. If what you're showing me is accurate, Karen could be facing serious legal consequences. I leaned back in my chair. Good. I don't just want her out of power. I want her accountable. She smiled. Then let's make this airtight. Together, we built the case. The fake invoices. The audio of her threatening foreclosure without cause. The violation letters about my wife's dress. All of it went into a growing file that was beginning to look like a prosecutor's dream. My lawyer assured me Karen didn't have a legal leg to stand on. But I didn't want to fight this in a courtroom. Not yet. No. I wanted her downfall to be public, undeniable, and humiliating the same way she'd tried to humiliate my wife. Meanwhile, at home, Linda became my quiet partner in the mission. One night, as I was cross-referencing budget lines, she brought over a shoebox. Inside were every single letter Karen had ever sent us, neatly saved and dated. I knew these would come in handy someday, she said with a small smile. I looked at her, really looked at her. For months, Karen had chipped at her confidence, tried to make her feel small, but here she was, steady, calm, and stronger than ever. That Marine Corps tattoo on her shoulder wasn't just for show, it was legacy. Her father, a decorated Marine, had passed it down to her, and in a way, to me. Every time Karen made Linda cry, that tattoo reminded us of resilience, of honor, of never backing down. And there was one more layer to the tattoo that Karen didn't know. Back in her younger years, before she became queen of the cul-de-sac, Karen had a bitter run-in with a Marine neighbor in her old community. He'd been the one to blow the whistle on her corruption the first time. Seeing that emblem, the globe, anchor, and eagle triggered a fear she couldn't mask. That's why she froze when Linda's dress ripped that day. That tattoo was her ghost, her unfinished nightmare. I realized we could use that. Not just the numbers, not just the legal case, the symbol itself. The very thing she feared would be what undid her. So, we waited. Timing is everything in an ambush. I knew Karen would eventually call another HOA meeting to flaunt her control. That would be our battlefield. In the meantime, I gathered every shred of evidence into a presentation. Dates, signatures, photos, even sworn statements from neighbors. I rehearsed my delivery like I was briefing commanding officers before a mission. Calm, clear, undeniable. Linda sat beside me as I practiced. She'd nod when I hit the right points, tilt her head when I rushed. At one point, she touched my arm and whispered, "You're not just fighting for us. You're fighting for everyone she's bullied." She was right. Karen had intimidated people for years, hiding behind bylaws and bureaucracy. But once the truth came out, the entire neighborhood would finally see her for what she was: a fraud, a thief, and a coward. By the time the HOA meeting was announced, I was ready. The evidence was ironclad. The allies were lined up. The lawyer was on standby. Even Linda, with her quiet strength and that tattoo Karen dreaded, was prepared to stand with me. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought she'd scared us into silence. But what she didn't realize was that silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. And when the night of the meeting came, Karen would find out exactly what happens when you push a Marine too far. The night of the big HOA meeting, the air felt heavier than usual. Neighbors shuffled into the clubhouse, some clutching clipboards, others whispering nervously. Karen was already there, perched at the head of the long, folding table like it was her throne. She wore pearls that glistened under the fluorescent lights, a powder blue sweater draped neatly over her shoulders, and that smirk, the same one she wore every time she thought she had us beaten, was plastered across her face. Linda squeezed my hand as we walked in. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I gave a small nod. "Always." Karen opened the meeting with her usual pomp. She clicked her pen against the table, cleared her throat, and began listing infractions like she was reading names off a casualty report. Several residents have failed to maintain acceptable curb appeal. One family, in particular, has continuously violated standards. She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed squarely on us, and has accrued fines that remain unpaid. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. George avoided eye contact. Frank crossed his arms and scowled. Karen leaned forward, voice sharp. "This kind of defiance cannot be tolerated. I recommend immediate escalation to foreclosure proceedings." The room gasped. She'd played her trump card. She thought the word foreclosure would send us scrambling, begging for mercy. Instead, I stood up, calm, steady, deliberate. "Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "With all due respect, you don't have the authority to do that." She laughed lightly, dismissively. "Oh, Daniel, you're welcome to disagree, but the board, I cut in, hasn't voted on any of this. In fact, you've been making unilateral decisions for months, and I have proof." That got everyone's attention. Heads turned. Whispers spread. Karen blinked, her smirk faltering just slightly. I pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the table with a satisfying thump. "These," I said, flipping through the pages, "are invoices for landscaping projects you claim cost the HOA over $6,000. I spoke directly to the company. Their bill was half that. The other half I held up a receipt from the home decor store. Showed up in your personal purchases lanterns, pillows, a bird bath. Funny how those never made it to the park." Murmurs rippled through the room. George finally found his courage. "He's right," he piped up. "She's been altering budget reports after meetings." "I've seen it." Karen's face flushed. She tried to laugh it off. "This is outrageous. Daniel is twisting the facts. I didn't let her breathe. Marines know when to press the advantage. Outrageous. What's outrageous is threatening foreclosure without due process. Here's an audio recording of you saying, and I quote, 'We'll let the courts decide,' without a single board vote. Illegal, by the way." Gasps again. Someone muttered, "She can't do that." Karen's voice rose an octave. "You can't record me without permission. Actually," I said evenly, "in this state, I can. One-party consent. And guess what? I was the party." The room broke into laughter. Not cruel, but incredulous. The Queen's crown was slipping. Karen slammed her hands on the table. "You think you're clever. You think your little military background makes you the law here. This is my neighborhood, and I will not." And then it happened. In her fury, Karen grabbed at Linda's arm as if to drag her into the spotlight. The motion was too rough, too desperate. Her fingers caught the fabric of Linda's cardigan, and with one sharp yank, the seam tore. Gasps filled the room as the sleeve slid down, revealing the ink beneath the bold Marine Corps emblem, sharp and proud against her skin. Karen froze, dead still. Her face went pale as chalk. Linda stood tall, her eyes locked on Karen's. She didn't flinch, didn't hide the tattoo. Instead, she squared her shoulders, letting every eye in the room see it. "This," Linda said softly but firmly, "is for my father, a Marine who fought harder battles than you could ever imagine. He taught me never to let a bully win." The room erupted in applause. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent were clapping, cheering, even standing. Frank let out a sharp whistle. George actually pounded the table. Karen, meanwhile, looked like the air had been sucked out of her. The sight of that tattoo, the one symbol tied to the man who'd exposed her in her last HOA reign, shattered her composure. She stammered, tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. I stepped closer, voice low but carrying. "Karen, your reign is over. We have the documents, the recordings, the testimony. You're finished." And just like that, the board voted unanimously. Karen was removed as HOA president on the spot. She gathered her pearls, her papers, her pride, and stormed out without another word. The door slammed, but the sound was drowned by cheers. I looked at Linda, her tattoo shining under the lights, and felt a swell of pride. For months, Karen had tried to strip us down, to humiliate us. But in the end, it was her own fear, her past sins that undid her. The battle was over, but the war left lessons we'd never forget. When the vote ended and Karen stormed out, it felt as if a storm cloud finally lifted from the cul-de-sac. For the first time in months, people weren't whispering, weren't nervously checking their lawns or their trash cans. They were smiling. Some even walked up to Linda, shaking her hand, complimenting her courage. That Marine Corps tattoo had said more in one moment than all of Karen's letters and threats combined. Linda stood beside me, her torn cardigan hanging loose, but her chin held high. She looked radiant, not humiliated. For months, Karen had tried to chip away at her confidence, but here she was, stronger than ever, with the whole neighborhood behind her. George, the timid board member, came up to us first. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I should have spoken up sooner. Karen scared me, but you stood your ground. Thank you." Frank clapped me on the back so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. "Knew you'd bring her down. Maureen, knew it the second she picked on your wife." Neighbors who had avoided us before now gathered around, offering words of support. Some even admitted they'd been victims of Karen's bullying, 2 fines for harmless decorations, public scoldings at meetings, threats whispered over fences. For the first time, people weren't afraid to talk about it. The spell was broken. Within a week, Karen was gone. She resigned officially after the lawyer I'd consulted sent her a formal notice outlining the fraud evidence. Rumor had it she put her house on the market. Some said she was moving in with a sister 2 towns over. Others whispered she'd try to reinvent herself in another HOA community. Maybe she would. Bullies rarely change, they just find new arenas. But she wouldn't be haunting ours anymore. The new board, free of her chokehold, voted to reverse every bogus fine she'd levied against us. The foreclosure threat null and void. Linda's dress violation erased, with an official apology entered into the minutes. And the financial mess Karen had left behind, an audit was launched, and it confirmed what we all knew: she'd been siphoning money for years. She'd face consequences in court, but that was no longer my battle. I'd done my part. As for us, life slowly returned to normal, but a new kind of normal. The cul-de-sac became warmer, more open. Neighbors started hosting potlucks without fear of Karen barging in. Kids drew chalk art on sidewalks again, and nobody rushed to scrub it away. Flags waved proudly, no matter how faded. It felt like freedom. One evening, Linda and I sat on the porch, sipping iced tea while the sun dipped low. She looked at me, her expression soft but strong. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. I smiled. "For us, yes. For Karen, maybe not. But that's not our problem anymore." She leaned her head on my shoulder, the tattoo visible in the fading light. "You know," she said, "I used to think that Mark was just a reminder of my dad, but now it feels like a shield, like he was still here, protecting us." I kissed the top of her head. He was, in his own way. And in that quiet moment, I realized the truth. Karen had never stood a chance. Not against the legacy of Marines, not against the bond Linda and I shared, and not against a neighborhood that finally found its courage. Karen wanted to humiliate us. Instead, she exposed herself. Karen wanted to break us. Instead, she made us stronger. Karen wanted to silence us. Instead, we found our voice and used it to end her reign. Life moved on. And though I wouldn't say I'm grateful for what she put us through, I am grateful for the lessons it left behind. Because in the end, we didn't just beat Karen. We reclaimed our home, our peace, and our dignity. And no HOA president, no matter how smug, can ever take that away. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: bullies thrive on silence. They feed on fear, on people looking down at their shoes instead of standing tall. But the moment you push back, the moment you shine a light on their lies, they crumble. Karen thought she owned our neighborhood. She thought she could shame my wife, intimidate me, and scare us into submission. But in the end, she only reminded us of something deeper. Dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. And when you hold on to it, when you protect your family and your values, no HOA tyrant, no neighbor, no bully can take it from you. So if you've ever faced your own Karen, know this: you're stronger than you think. Stand tall, speak up, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong in your own home. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor who went too far? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because more stories like this are coming your way.